So we all know where we are. I know that the board had asked for this work session. The board had submitted several questions over the course of the past 10 days or so to administration so that we could get background information for you and find out things. And tonight's questions aren't just limited to that. So once we give answers to your queries, you might have follow-up questions that you want to ask, and we'll do our best to respond to those this evening. I know at our last meeting, Mr. Thode, you did ask if we would make a robocall. Now, upon advice of counsel, I couldn't do that because it's the same as when we have the budget vote. We can't, when we send out a robocall, it's only to a select group, which is our parents. It's not our entire community. So we couldn't do that before it was up, and that's why it was advertised. So since everyone sent their questions, you'll be hearing from mostly myself and Mr. Tobin. Mr. Woolsey might help us with some things as well, Ms. Bradshaw and Mrs. Vicigliano, but I think it's not just me that you'll be hearing from tonight, it's just from whoever we feel has the best handle on the response and can explain to you most succinctly. So, I don't know, Mr. Thode, maybe I just turn it over to you. I know you had a series of questions that we responded to, so if you would like.
Yeah, I do have, and I apologize because obviously I am the least senior here, so I don't have a lot of background information that you all may have. So some of my questions may be a little elementary, but I just want to clarify some things. I know one of the questions that's come up is what in the budget can be cut, meaning in our yearly budget. Are there other savings we can make, cut? I understand that closing a building, whatever building that is a yearly savings forever and ever and ever. So how have we looked at that? What are our options, if any, along those lines?
Start? All right, well, one of the things that you need to understand when we make cuts, we have to start with what's non-mandated. Those are the first things to do, so that means you're going to look at the program. So things that are not mandated include full-day kindergarten, elementary librarians, electives at the secondary level, elective competitions. That means sending students, as we do with DECA, and all the other kind of Intel, not sponsoring students to go to those things. Any co-curricular activities that we have, those clubs at any level. Late buses, theater productions, the extent of any of our elective programming, class size, those are all things that we could start to look at because everything else is mandated. Even with the closing of the school, like I said, the future budgets could become compromised. So Andrew, maybe if you just want to add to that.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Dr. Bersani says, I mean, if you remember several years that we were, before the last couple of years, is basically when we created these long lists of items of things we could cut. Many of those items is what Dr. Bersani said, but in addition to that, we've also made a conscious effort to trim certain areas of budgets without decimating any one program. So that's one of the things we were very cognizant of over the last budgetary years, that we've done we thought a pretty good job of not decimating any specific program. But like Dr. Bersani said, those are the type of items that are non-mandated that we could actually cut, but obviously they're programs that we cherish here at the school district. Just to reiterate, I know there was some talk about transportation as well, specifically private parochial transportation. I just want to clarify, there is a mandate for districts to provide private and parochial transportation. Specifically, we're mandated by the state to transport those students who live within 15 miles. We also have our own policy where we do transport private parochial up to 20 miles. To change that would need a referendum. Okay, we've talked about that in the past, but that's something the voters would have to approve for us to change our mileage limits for any of the mileage limits, private parochial, elementary, and or secondary. For example, we transport all elementary students, where the state requires K through 8, we have to transport those students who live at least 2 miles or farther away from school. And we transport secondary students who live over 1 mile from their school. And for high school or 9 through 12, the state mandate is 3 miles. So those are things that we've talked about in the past of reducing, but again, they require a voter referendum. We know when we did the voter referendum several years back, it did get voted down. The only other transportation item that we could, as James mentioned, was late buses, obviously. That would save the district approximately $200,000 a year. Obviously, that's another program that we do cherish, and it's very useful for our students. And then obviously, there's transportation tied to athletic budgets, somewhere close to about $600,000.
Just to follow up on that, one piece is the late bus. Have we done, or do we do oversee that to see how much they're filled? Do we do that on a regular basis?
Yeah, we monitor it pretty well. I mean, it's hard to say on any given day if it's used. At the beginning of the year, obviously, we have more usage than we do sometimes throughout the year, but we do monitor it the best we can. Again, when we provide late buses, if we provide it for our students, we also have to provide it for the private parochial, so we do that as well. So yes, it is something we monitor, but again, if we were to eliminate it altogether, it would be a maximum of $200,000.
If I could just jump in on that, we did a study, if I'm wrong too, within the last 2 years on exactly how much usage our late buses get. I thought it was,
I thought it was
1,000 kids a month or something, some ridiculous. It's a
Yeah,
big
It's a
number.
lot of usage.
It's a big number, and I think we discussed at the time, and I apologize for everything.
Just-
It's an economic issue for our parents, and if we didn't have late buses, because we have so many double-income households, we'd have a lot of our kids who might be closed out of sports and things. I mean, it's on any given day, we were getting phone calls, the late buses are half empty, but we did a look at this, and it was about 1,000 kids a month. Okay.
Just to jump in for 2 seconds, we had said several years ago on putting out a referendum. It really wasn't that long ago. It was actually 4 years ago, right before I came on. And I think there were 2 outcomes, which was whether, not to revisit history, whether it was a correctly worded referendum or not. When we changed mileage offerings for our families attending public school, and when we changed mileage offerings for private and parochial, the community came out very unhappy when that went into effect. Where we were having private and parochial go to a central pickup point, and we changed it. We had added many more walkers, so I don't know whether any of us had the appetite to revisit that. While we're on the topic of private and parochial, not only do we provide busing, can we just touch on what else we're mandated to provide? Our community residents who decide to send their kids to private and parochial, because it just adds up into our budget.
Sure, we also have to, in addition to the transportation, we also have to provide textbooks, and we also have to provide health and welfare services for all those students, which entails basically any speech, social workers, psychologists, things like that. We also have to offer
Nurses.
And students are also entitled to special education services.
So that's mandated.
Yes.
With,
Just right down as bus subject for a second. I don't know if there was a letter from a parent or whatnot, but there was a question that did the quantity of buses or bus runs increase over the last couple of years, or has it remained flat, or is it?
We've actually, our large bus services, we've actually have been decreasing. I did hear that comment. I don't know where it came from. We have a gist where it might have come from, but we've actually been reduced since about 2007. We've reduced over 20 large buses. We do a couple, like for instance, next 16-17, we're going to trim another 2 large buses, mainly through declining enrollment. So through that time period, we've trimmed over 20 buses, which includes both due to declining enrollment and just putting more kids, checking the capacities of each bus.
Do the whole study on the ridership.
Right.
Okay.
Right, I'm sorry, just one more thing. There was a letter that came into the board this week where someone suggested to me that I had quoted to them that I left my former parish over the issue of parochial busing. That is not why I left my former parish. It's not, I may have mentioned it in the same conversation that I had left my former parish and that I'm now at a different parish. I did not do it over parochial busing. I assure you it's a far more ridiculous reason than that. That's not why. So if we could I could correct that with whoever it was, that's not what happened.
The other thing I would like to point out, and it's only something that we're surmising on our point, we do know that the number 66 was quoted. And in looking back at some of the housing reports, there is one slide that says large bus is 66. 66 is the capacity of a large bus. It holds 66 students. So there may have just been a little misinterpretation when the question came from you. So just to make that clarification.
Just on the transportation, can you just let me know when the last contract was negotiated, and there's any possibility of renegotiating that contract for the year that we're looking to close?
Yeah, I don't have the exact year offhand, but it was several years ago, I think in 2005 or so, we did an RFP for both the small vans and the large buses. We had renegotiated in the midst of each of their contracts, specifically before my time was here, the board negotiated with one of the contractors and was able to reduce their yearly annual increase. Since then, they're subject, similar to we are, with extensions, meaning that we can offer an extension to them, and they are obligated to they can only extend by the CPI of the transportation. So for us, that's been obviously a benefit for the last several years. We're proposing another extension coming this year for next year, because their CPI is as low as our CPI, basically. They go until May, but basically their increase last year was 0. We're looking at, as you know, our CPI is right around 0 as well, so they might be increasing again somewhere along those lines.
Okay, just I guess to piggyback a little bit on that, I did mention in this room and have in prior budget cycles the issue of this notion that Smithtown offers ridership for our parochial and private students for 20 miles when the state mandate is 15. I think people don't understand that in order to change that, it would be a referendum. The public has let us know in other ways that there would be an outcry against that. But we do mention it it's appropriate to mention it at budget time. I'll be mentioning it again this year. I'm going to be asking you again, Andrew, to update that number for me. I think last year it was in the neighborhood of $135,000 to $150,000.
Private parochial is actually more than that. When we
No, but just that piece of it, 15 to 20.
20, that's my next question.
Yeah, I'll have to check on the number, but I still think it was more than that.
It's no more than that. Okay, so it's a fair number, but it's not something that we can just decide with a yay or nay vote. It would have to go out to the community.
Right.
But if we could get community support for something like that, I certainly would be willing to entertain it, as opposed to going after a sporting program or an art program or something else. I'd absolutely be willing to look at that. I've been willing to look at it every year. Okay.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that,
Yeah.
which is, are there any costs, and what are they for doing that referendum?
The cost of an election, you could either piggyback it off of your budget election, or you could have a separate referendum specifically for that. And usually, it's a good $10,000 for a vote.
It's higher.
Even if we
The district clerk is indicating it's much higher than that.
Even
Yes,
if we
15,000.
piggyback it off the budget vote?
No, if
No.
we piggyback it off the budget,
No additional.
it shouldn't be
It's
changed.
not.
There's no change. no.
Cost neutral. But the idea would be if we could divorce it, there's an absolute advantage from divorcing it from a budget vote, obviously. If having it as a standalone, but that would be a $16,000 expense. Ish.
Mhm.
Well, we have the new machines, so we're not.
New machines, that's right.
And just on the budget piece again, obviously the budget season's coming up. Can you explain, I mean, I think I have a pretty good handle on it, but I don't think everybody might. Can you explain how we have this current budget cycle, which is for next year, and then how you anticipate the savings will fit into the budget the following year when we're trying to close a school potentially? So like, it can be confusing because we have what's upcoming right now, and what if we overestimate or underestimate in either our current budget coming up or in the future budget, which is when we're looking to possibly lose it?
Yeah, right now, we're gonna start deliberating the 16-17 budget, as you know, so we're just gathering all that information now. We get critical information right around now. For instance, the governor just released his state aid proposal last week, and then the legislators and the governor negotiate through as late as April before they decide on a final budget. We're waiting for the final CPI numbers from December to determine the tax cap levy. And then other things like expenses, like specifically pension expenses, we typically get ranges around November of the current year. So November for this year, we get for 16-17. And that's really, if you look at the last couple of years of our budgets, 15-16 and 16-17 next year specifically, that's one of the benefits we've been having budget to budget is the declining pension expenses. This year we're projecting a decrease of about 1.5 million in pensions because they're still going down. For 15-16, we saved over $3.5 million in expenses. So this is the time that I keep saying, it's kind of the reprieve time where we went up the hill with pension and health and everything, and we were getting killed in our budget cycles because we were coming into deficits. This is the time where we have a little bit of reprieve, specifically in these 2 years. I can't predict that again for 17, 18. So if you look at our normal expenses, and it's hard to predict in the future, obviously, but we know our rollover contracts, meaning just rolling over our salaries by contract, typically is about a $3 million increase each year. Health insurance is a wild card, but if you look at an industry average, it's anywhere from 7 to 8%. For that, that would equal upwards of almost another $2 million if that would happen. So if you're looking at 17, 18, that's about $5 million, everything else being equal, that we have to increase in the budget, assuming pensions stay flat. We don't know that. They could go up, they could go down. But then you look, those are only 2 expenses, obviously 2 big expenses, but then compare that to our revenue projection. Now we're seeing in a good year, we'll be lucky to get a 2% CPI. This will be the 3rd consecutive year that our CPI has been below 2 for the 3 budget cycles that the CPI has been calculated. But even a 2% tax levy increase represents $3.6 million on the tax levy for us. Now, is state aid we already have a $5 million expense. We've got 3.6 if we're lucky on the tax levy. Is state aid gonna fill in the gap? Well, then the question, are we gonna get the rest of our GEA? Once we do get our GEA, I'll be quite honest, we'll be lucky to get increases from year to year, because once that GEA is back in, we're not gonna get what they call expense-based aids and pupil-based aids increases every year, because just frankly, we're losing enrollment. A lot of aid figures are tied to your enrollment. And secondly, other aids are tied on your previous year expenses. Specifically, as I mentioned, transportation aid, we're decreasing our transportation aid expenses. Therefore, our state aid reimbursement the following year will be lower. So those are the type of things we're looking at. I can't tell you 17, 18 will be the deficit year, but it's coming more and more likely as we look out ahead. That 17, 18, or 18, 19, if we don't get those type of increases, we know our expenses are going to go up. So we're going to be certainly facing